My dad has that same Harley. 5 words. A young woman's voice casual as a coffee refill, and 4 men who had ridden through war grief and silence for 30 years went completely still. Nobody moved, nobody breathed. The kind of quiet that settles in when something old and buried suddenly claws its way back to the surface. And Emily Carter had no idea what she'd just done. If this story already has your heart beating a little faster, you're exactly where you're supposed to be. Subscribe to this channel, stay with us all the way to the end, and drop a comment telling me what city you are watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The diner sat off Route 86 like something the desert had simply refused to swallow. Sun-cracked parking lot, a hand-painted sign missing 2 letters, booths with duct tape holding the vinyl together. The kind of place where the coffee was man and the pie was perfect, and nobody asked questions about anybody else's business. It had been that kind of place for 40 years, and it planned to stay that way. Emily Carter had worked the morning shift at May's Desert Stop for going on 3 years. She was 24, quick on her feet, with dark eyes that noticed at everything. In a smile she deployed, strategically wider for the regulars, smaller for the difficult ones, and completely reserved for the rare customer who actually said thank you without being prompted. She wasn't hard, she wasn't soft. She was a young woman who had learned early that life moved faster when you stayed practical. She had been topping off a trucker's coffee when she heard them. Not saw, heard. 4 motorcycles coming off the highway had a sound that was completely unlike anything else on the road. It wasn't just engine noise. It was a kind of announcement, something low and rolling that got into your chest before it got into your ears. Emily had grown up with that sound. She knew it the way she knew her own name. She turned toward the window before the first bike even pulled into the lot. 4 of them. Big machines, all Harleys, the kind that looked like they had earned their scratches. The men climbing off were not young. Late 50s, early 60s, maybe older, on one of them. Leather vests so worn the black had gone gray at the edges. Patches she couldn't read at this distance. Faces that looked like the Arizona desert itself had done the weathering, deep lines, hard jaw, the kind of eyes that had seen enough to stop being surprised by most things. The diner went quiet before they even opened the door. Not dramatically quiet, not movie quiet, just that particular shift that happens in a room full of people when something walks in that changes the social temperature. 2 truckers at the counter stopped mid-conversation. The family in the corner booth instinctively pulled their kids a little closer. The short order cook Hector leaned sideways to look through the pass-through window, then went back to his grill without a word. Emily put down the coffee pot and grabbed 4 menus. This was her section. That wasn't even a question. She crossed the floor and met them at the door because if you let that kind of energy settle into a booth without direction, it had a way of making the whole room hold its breath for the next 40 minutes. Morning, she said, making direct eye contact with the one closest to her. He was the biggest of the 4, not tall, but built wide and solid with a gray beard trimmed close and a scar that ran from his left ear to the corner of his jaw. His vest patch read, gravel. 4 of you, Antho. 4 of us, he said. His voice matched his face. Low measured, not unfriendly, but not warm either. The voice of a man who had learned exactly how much energy words cost. Corner booth's the biggest, she said, already walking. Follow me. They did, and the room exhaled just slightly as they moved away from the entrance and toward the back. She handed out menus and took their drink orders without drama coffee, all around water for one of them, the one they called Dutch, who was the quietest of the 4 and had the kind of stillness that made Emily think of water running deep. Torch ordered orange juice and caught her expression and said, "My cardiologist," by way of explanation, and she laughed because it was the honest answer, and she respected that. Rex, the 4th one older than the others, maybe by a decade, with white hair pulled back and hands that hadn't stopped shaking since he sat down, didn't order anything at first. He just looked at the menu like it was written in a language he was trying to remember. "Take your time," Emily told him, and meant it. She went back behind the counter, poured 4 coffees, put in their food orders, and went back to doing her job. The room had normalized. The truckers were talking again. The family had moved on to arguing about whether to go to the Grand Canyon or Tombstone, which was a real fight with real stakes, Emily could tell. She wasn't thinking about the 4 bikers particularly, until she went back to refill their kefis 20 minutes later and saw the parking lot through the window behind their booth. She stopped, set the coffee pot on the edge of the table without looking at it. That Harley, she said, and her voice had changed completely, lost all its professional steadiness. She was pointing through the glass at one of the motorcycles, a 1988 soft-tail, dark red, under the dust, with a particular set of custom chrome handlebars she would have recognized from a mile away. The red one. Gravel turned to look where she was pointing. What about it? My dad has that same bike. She said it the way you say something you can't quite believe you're seeing. Exact same year, exact same color, exact same bars. I've never seen another one like that in my life. The table went quiet, not the polite quiet of a conversation pausing. Something else. Torch had set down his coffee cup, with a soft, careful click, like he was placing something fragile. Dutch stopped moving entirely. Rex, who had finally settled on oatmeal and had been working through it, slowly put his spoon down and looked up for the first time in 20 minutes with an expression that Emily couldn't immediately read. And Gravel looked at her with eyes that had shifted from politely neutral to something considerably more focused. What's your dad's name? He asked. The question was too direct, too immediate, like he already knew it might matter. Emily felt a small, instinctive tightening in her chest. Not fear exactly. Something closer to the feeling you get when you reach for a light switch in the dark and your hand lands on something unexpected. Carter, she said. Jack Carter. Nobody at the table spoke. Torch made a sound, not a word, a sound that came from somewhere deeper than words, a short, involuntary exhale that was somewhere between a laugh and something that hurt. Dutch put his elbows on the table and dropped his face into his hands. Rex pushed his oatmeal aside and looked out the window at the parking lot, and his jaw had gone tight in a way that had nothing to do with his food. And Gravel was still looking at her, and his eyes had gone somewhere far away and then come back, and when they came back, they were wet. Not crying, not yet, but close. Jack Carter, he repeated, quietly, like a name he hadn't said out loud in a long time. Emily's hand was still holding the coffee pot. She became aware of it, set it down on the table properly this time. You know him, she said. It wasn't a question. Yeah, Gravel said. We know him. How? Gravel looked at the other three. Some kind of silent consensus moved around the table fast and practiced the way it does between men who have known each other long enough that words have become redundant. Sit down, Dutch said. He hadn't looked up from his hands yet. Please. Emily looked over her shoulder. Hector was watching through the pass-through. She held up one finger and he gave her a small nod that meant he had the floor. She sat down at the edge of the booth across from Gravel and folded her hands on the table. Tell me, she said, and Gravel told her. He didn't start at the beginning because the beginning was too far back and too complicated to reach in a diner booth. He started in the middle the way you do when a story has too much weight to carry from the front. He told her about a night in 1998 outside of Tucson when 4 men and a dozen others had found themselves in a situation they hadn't planned for and couldn't get out of without help. He didn't use the word trouble. He used the word situation, and his tone made clear that the word was carrying considerably more than its surface meaning. He told her that a man named Jack Carter, who wasn't a member of their club, who didn't owe them anything, who had no good reason in the world to get involved, had gotten involved anyway. He told her what that had cost Jack. Emily listened without interrupting. She had grown up in the habit of listening to her father in exactly the same way, waiting for him to find the shape of a thing before responding, because Jack Carter was a man who needed the space to locate the right words, and sometimes it took longer than other people were comfortable waiting. He lost his job over it, Gravel said. His actual job, what he did for work. People he'd known for 15 years turned their backs. There were other things. He stopped. There were other things we're not going to talk about in a diner. But yeah, he paid for it. And you, Emily asked? We rode out. We always rode out. He said it without flinching, but without pride either. That's what we did. That was our way. You deal with the situation and you move. You left him. We left him. Silence. Torch was looking at the table. Dutch had finally lifted his face from his hands and his eyes were red. Rex was still looking out the window and Emily could see his hand under the table folded together so tightly his knuckles had gone white. We sent money, Torch said, for a couple of years after. He sent it back, Emily said quietly. She didn't know how she knew that. She just knew it the way you know things about a person you've watched your whole life without being able to articulate what you've seen. Didn't he? Torch looked at her for a long moment. Yeah, he did. That's my dad. Yeah. Gravel leaned back in the booth and looked at the ceiling and then back at her. Yeah, that's Jack. She didn't cry. She wasn't someone who cried in front of strangers, and she wasn't about to start today. But she felt something shift in her chest, some complicated knot of feelings she didn't have names for yet, and she gave herself exactly 3 seconds to feel it before she spoke again. He doesn't talk about any of this, she said. I've never heard any of it. Not one word. Wouldn't surprise me, Gravel said. He doesn't talk about a lot of things. She was looking at her hands now. He's been alone since my mom died. 11 years. He's out on Mesquite Road. He's got his house. He's got his workshop. He doesn't reach out much. I drive out on Sundays when I can. He's always glad to see me, but she searched for the word. He's somewhere else. Part of him is always somewhere else. Nobody at the table said anything. She looked up. All four of them were looking at her now, and the expressions on their faces were variations of the same thing, that particular combination of guilt and recognition that shows up on a person's face when someone else is describing something they already know they are partly responsible for. The Harley, she said, the one outside, he has one just like it. He hasn't ridden it in 11 years. It just sits in the garage. He covers it every fall and uncovers it every spring, and he looks at it, but he doesn't ride it. Rex made a sound. It was the first sound he'd made since she sat down, and it cracked something in the air. Doesn't ride, Gravel said. Not once. Not since my mom died. Gravel's jaw tightened. He put his hands flat on the table and looked at them. Then he looked at Dutch and Torch and Rex, and the look that passed between the four of them was long and complicated, and weighted with something Emily couldn't fully decode but could feel the way you can feel a conversation happening in another room through a wall. Where's Mesquite Road? Dutch said. His voice was level, but his eyes weren't. Emily looked at him. 40 minutes east. Why? Because, Gravel said, and he said it like a man who had made a decision and was done circling it. We owe your father 40 minutes. We owe him a hell of a lot more than that, but 40 minutes east is where we'll start. He might not want to see you, Emily said. Not to be cruel, just because it was true, and she was her father's daughter, and Jack Carter had taught her that honesty was the only thing worth spending breath on. He might not, Gravel agreed. He can be, she paused, he can be stubborn. So can we, Torch said, and for the first time he smiled. It was a tired smile, but it was real. That's not a new problem. She looked at the four of them for a long moment. This table of old, worn men with their faded vests and their quiet eyes and their hands that were carrying a weight she was only beginning to understand. I'll draw you a map, she said finally. Gravel nodded. Thank you. She started to stand, then stopped. Can I ask you something first? Yeah. The night it happened, what my dad did for you, was it worth it for him, I mean? Do you think he'd do it again? Gravel didn't hesitate, didn't even blink. Jack Carter would do it again in 5 seconds, and we both know it. That's not the question. Then what's the question? The question, Gravel said, is what we're going to do about it. He met her eyes. And we're going to do something about it. Today, if that's all right with you. Emily Carter looked at this man, at all four of them, and thought about her father in his house, on Mesquite Road, in the workshop that smelled like motor oil and old wood, with his covered motorcycle, and his 11-year silence, and his Sunday breakfasts, and the way he always seemed to be waiting for something that never arrived. She thought about what it meant that she had glanced out a window at a red Harley. She thought about 5 words. It's all right with me, she said. And then she went to find a pen and a piece of paper, because some things you don't leave to chance, and some directions need to be written down clearly so that the men who need to follow them don't take a wrong turn. Gravel watched her go. Dutch said quietly, 11 years. I know, Gravel said. He's been out there alone for 11 years, man. I know, Dutch. We should have. I know. Gravel cut him off, but not unkindly. I know what we should have done. We're going to do it now. That's what we've got. Torch put his elbows on the table. What do we even say to him? I don't know yet. Rex, still looking at the window, spoke for only the second time since they'd sat down. His voice was quiet and rough and a little broken at the edges, the way a voice gets when it's been carrying something heavy for too long. We say we're sorry, he said. We say it and we mean it, and we don't dress it up. That's all we've got. Nobody argued. Emily came back with a hand-drawn map on the back of a guest check, straight lines, and two landmarks and the name of the road spelled out clearly. She put it on the table in front of Gravel. "The driveway's hard to see," she said. "There's a cedar post at the turnoff. He painted it white years ago, but the paint's mostly gone. Look for the shape." "Okay," Gravel said. She hesitated, something moving through her expression that she didn't try to hide. "He's going to be surprised," she said. "Yeah. He doesn't surprise easily. But this will do it," Gravel said. She nodded, started to walk away. "Miss Carter," Dutch said. She turned. "Thank you." He said it simply, like it meant a dozen different things stacked on top of each other. "For stopping, for talking to us, for drawing that map." Emily looked at him, at all of them. "He's my dad," she said. "Whatever happened out there in 1998, whatever he did, and whatever it cost, he's still my dad. And he deserves—" Her voice caught just slightly. She steadied it. "He deserves better than an empty house and a covered-up motorcycle." She turned and walked back to her section. Gravel picked up the map and looked at it for a long moment. Then he folded it carefully and put it in the breast pocket of his vest right over his heart. "Let's eat," he said. "Then we ride." And the four of them did exactly that. They ate their breakfast in near silence, the way men eat when they have somewhere important to be, and the weight of it has already settled into the meal. Torch had his orange juice, Dutch had his coffee, and then another coffee, and then refused a third. Rex ate his oatmeal all the way to the bottom, unhurried like a man who has finally decided what he's doing next and doesn't need to rush now that the decision is made. And Gravel sat and looked out the window at the parking lot and at the red Harley with its particular chrome handlebars, which he had ridden for 22 years, and which he had chosen, he was only now realizing because he had never let himself forget. He hadn't ridden it to remember Jack Carter, or he'd told himself that. He laid two 20s on the table and a 10 on top of that, which was more than the check by a good margin, and would tell Emily Carter exactly as much as he wanted it to when she came to clear the table. Then he stood up, and the other three stood with him, and they walked out into the Arizona morning and swung onto their bikes, and Gravel unfolded the map one more time and studied the route and then folded it back and put it away. 40 minutes, Dutch said. "Let's make it 30, Gravel said. He started his bike. The sound of it rolled out across the cracked parking lot and inside May's Desert Stop. Emily Carter heard it from behind the counter and stood very still for a moment, her hands wrapped around a coffee pot that had gone cold, listening to four Harleys pull onto Route 86 heading east. She thought, go find him. She thought, don't let him send you away. She thought for just a moment about calling ahead, about picking up her phone and dialing her father's number and saying, Dad, there are some people coming to see you and I need you to hear me out before you shut the door. She picked up her phone. She looked at it. She put it back down. Some things she decided needed to arrive without warning. Some things needed to land the way the truth lands, sudden and real and impossible to prepare for. She went back to work. And 40 miles east, on a quiet road outside of a small Arizona town, Jack Carter was in his workshop with a cup of coffee and no particular expectations for the day, the way he spent most of his days, now not knowing that something was moving toward him on the highway, something old and overdue and necessary, something that had started with 5 words from his daughter's mouth and was now being carried toward him on 4 motorcycles at 70 miles an hour. He didn't know, but somewhere underneath the quiet that had settled around him over 11 long, slow years, somewhere underneath all of that, something in Jack Carter recognized a sound that was still 30 miles away, the way you sometimes recognize a thing you've been waiting for before it's close enough to see. He stood very still. He listened. Then he shook his head and went back to his coffee. He had learned not to trust hope too early, but the sound kept coming. The cedar post was almost invisible. Just like Emily had said, white paint worn down to bare wood, the color of it nearly matching the dust. Gravel almost missed it. Almost. He didn't. He turned. The others followed without a word. The driveway was long and unpaved, and the sound of 4 Harleys on loose gravel was the kind of sound that announced itself whether you wanted it to or not. There was no element of surprise here. Whoever was in that house already knew something was coming. Gravel cut his engine first. The others followed in sequence, Torch, Dutch, Rex, until the only sound was the dry tick of cooling metal and the wind moving through the scrub brush on either side of the drive. None of them moved immediately. That happens sometimes before something important. You arrive and then you just sit with the fact of having arrived, because once you get off the bike, it becomes real and you can't ride away from it anymore. He's in there, Dutch said. How do you know? Because that workshop door is open 6 inches and there's a light on inside it, and Jack Carter hasn't changed one single habit in 30 years. Dutch climbed off his bike. He's in there. Gravel got off. Rex got off. Torch got off last, moving carefully because his left hip had been a problem since February, and he'd stopped pretending otherwise. They walked toward the house. Nobody knocked on the front door. That felt wrong, too formal, too much like strangers, which they were and weren't simultaneously. They went around the side toward the workshop, the way you approach a man's house when you actually know him, when you understand that where he lives and where he exists are 2 different locations. Gravel stopped at the workshop door. He knocked twice on the frame. Silence, then movement, then a voice. Emily, if that's you, I told you Sunday is Sunday, and today is... Jack Carter pulled the door open and stopped. He looked at Gravel. He looked at Dutch standing just behind him. He looked at Torch and Rex further back, and his face went through 4 or 5 different expressions in about 2 seconds. Surprise, confusion, recognition, and something that landed hard somewhere between anger and a feeling he hadn't let himself feel in long enough that he didn't have a ready name for it. He looked older than Gravel remembered. Not in a bad way, just in the way of a man who has lived inside his own company for a long time. He was lean, a little thinner than he used to be, with gray at his temples and a beard he hadn't bothered with back in the day. His hands were the same big, capable, oil-stained at the knuckles, and his eyes were the same too, dark and direct and not willing to pretend. Jack Carter had never been a man who pretended. No, he said, just that, one word. Jack, Gravel started. No, Jack stepped back and started to close the door. I don't know how you found this place. I don't know what you want, and I don't care. You turn those bikes around, and you go back whatever direction you came from. Gravel put his hand on the door, not forcefully, just enough. Your daughter found us, he said. Jack stopped. His hand was still on the door. His body had gone still in the way it goes still when information lands that requires a full recalibration before you can respond to it. Emily, he said, flat. May's desert stop. She recognized my Harley. Jack let go of the door. He didn't open it wider. He didn't close it either. He just let go and stood there, and his jaw worked once like he was chewing on something that had no good flavor to it. She called you, he said. She didn't call anybody. She drew us a map. Gravel kept his voice level. On the back of a guest check. She told us about the post. She told us your paint had worn off. Something moved through Jack's face. It was complicated and fast, and he shut it down before it fully arrived. He looked past Gravel at the other 3, and his expression when he got to Rex was the most complicated of all, the longest, the hardest to read, the one that stayed. Rex, he said quietly. Jack, Rex said. Neither of them said anything else for a moment. You look terrible, Jack said finally. Yeah, Rex said. I know. Another silence, and then barely the corner of Jack's mouth moved. Not quite a smile, the ghost of one, the memory of how a smile used to feel. He pushed the door open the rest of the way and walked back into the workshop without saying anything further, which was the closest thing to an invitation they were going to get, and all 4 of them knew it. They went in. The workshop smelled like motor oil and sawdust and old coffee, and there was a work table along one wall with tools laid out in a specific order that was clearly a system and not an accident. A truck engine in partial disassembly. Stacks of parts labeled with painter's tape and handwriting that was careful and precise. And in the far corner under a canvas cover that had been washed so many times it had faded from green to gray, something that had the unmistakable silhouette of a motorcycle. Nobody looked at it directly. Not yet. Jack picked up his coffee cup from the workbench, found it empty, set it back down. He turned and leaned against the bench and crossed his arms and looked at the 4 of them, the way a man looks at something he spent a long time thinking he'd never see again, and isn't entirely sure how he feels about seeing it now. You've got 5 minutes, he said, talk. Gravel looked at Dutch. Dutch looked at the floor. Torch was the one who spoke first, which surprised all of them, including Torch. We were wrong, Torch said, to leave. The way we left after what you did We were wrong. Jack's expression didn't change. That's 2 minutes gone. Keep going. We sent money, Dutch said. He said it quietly, not defensively. I know you sent it back. That was your right. But we sent it because we didn't know what else to do, and we weren't brave enough to do the actual thing, which was come back here in person and stand in front of you. And what changed, Jack said? What made today different from any other day in the last 26 years? Nobody answered immediately. Go ahead, Jack said. I'm asking a real question. Your daughter, Greville said. She's what changed. Emily, Jack said it the way you say something you were still processing. She sat down with us. She told us about the Harley in the corner that hasn't moved in 11 years. Gravel paused. She told us about the Sundays, about the empty house. Jack's jaw tightened. She shouldn't have told you any of that. She told us because she loves you and she doesn't know what to do with what she sees out here. Gravel kept going even as Jack's eyes hardened. She told us because she's 24 years old and her mother's gone and her father is disappearing one quiet day at a time, and she needed somebody to do something because she doesn't have the tools to do it herself. The workshop went very quiet. Jack uncrossed his arms. He looked at the floor for a long moment, and when he looked back up, his expression was different. Not softer exactly, but something had shifted behind it. Some internal position that he'd been holding for a very long time had moved just slightly. 26 years, he said. You know how long that is? Yeah, Gravel said. We know. You missed my wedding. You missed my daughter being born. You missed Sarah getting sick. His voice was controlled, but controlled the way water behind a dam is controlled by structure, not by absence of force. You missed the funeral. You missed all of it. And now you're standing in my workshop and you want to what? Apologize. Check it off some list. No list, Rex said. Jack looked at him. Rex was the oldest of them and had always been in some obscure way the one Jack had been closest to back when close was a thing they were. Rex looked back at him steadily with those hands still folded together and still trembling slightly and not apologizing for the trembling. Then what? Jack said. I don't know, Rex said. I don't have a plan. I don't have a speech. He stopped. I just know that I'm 71 years old and my hands shake now, and I've been sitting on a truth for a long time, and I'm tired. I'm real tired of carrying it. What truth? Rex met his eyes. That you were the best man I ever knew. In my whole life on the road, or off it with the club, or without the best man I ever knew. And we treated you like a chapter we could close. And I am sorry for that every single day. Not today because we drove out here. Every day. The silence that followed was the longest one yet. Jack stood very still. His face was doing things he clearly didn't want it to do, and he was fighting it the way a man fights something that has been building pressure for 11 years and has finally found a crack. He turned away from them, faced the workbench, put both hands flat on it, and dropped his head. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. After about 30 seconds, Jack said without turning around, Sarah would have opened the door before you knocked. Torch made a sound, small, sharp, like something breaking cleanly. She would have had coffee on before you got off the bikes, Jack continued. His voice was rough. She would have called your names across the yard and not given a damn about 26 years or any of it. That was her. That was just how she was built. He stopped. I'm not her, he said. I've never been her. I don't have that kind of... He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Gravel said, we know. She's the one who kept saying I should reach out. Years ago, early on. She said, those boys need to hear from you, Jack. You think they don't carry it? And I said, he shook his head. I said what I said, and then she got sick, and then it was a different kind of time, and then she was gone. And after that, I didn't have the energy to carry anything extra. I was just trying to stay upright. He finally turned around. His eyes were dry. He had won that particular fight just barely. I don't blame you for leaving, he said. I want to. Believe me, I have wanted to every single day for a very long time. But I know how it works out there, and I knew how it worked when I made the call I made, and I can't pretend I didn't know. He looked at each of them in turn. What I blame you for is the silence. 26 years of silence. That's what cost me. Dutch said, that's fair. It's not about fair, Jack said. It's about truth. And the truth is, I had a wife who wanted me to call, and I didn't. And then I didn't have a wife. And then calling felt like it would take something I didn't have anymore. And every year it got harder. Not easier. Harder. He looked at Rex. How long have your hands been like that? Rex glanced down. Going on 2 years. You see somebody about it. Yeah, Rex made a small gesture. It's what it is. Does it hurt? Not much. Mostly it's just a reminder. Of what? Rex looked at him. That time moves, even when you want it to stop. Jack was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I'll make coffee. And that was it. That was the door opening, not wide, not with any kind of ceremony. Just a man saying he'd make coffee, which meant stay, which meant the conversation wasn't over, which meant something had shifted enough that shutting them out was no longer the operating plan. Gravel exhaled. He hadn't realized he'd been holding his breath. They gathered around the workbench while Jack filled the percolator, and there was some movement of men recalibrating, finding where to stand, what to do with their hands, the particular social geometry of people who need to figure out what they are to each other now. Dutch leaned against the wall. Torch found a stool. Rex stayed standing close to Jack but not crowding him. The coffee took a few minutes and nobody forced conversation while it did. When Jack handed out cups, 4 of them mismatched the way a man's cups get mismatched when he's been living alone for a long time, Dutch looked around the workshop properly for the first time and said, You fixed up Halverson's engine in here. Jack stopped. How do you know about Halverson's engine? Rex mentioned it, years ago. Said you were the only man he trusted to do it right. Jack looked at Rex. Rex lifted one shoulder. I talked about you. Even when we weren't talking to you, I talked about you. To these guys. All the time. Something moved through Jack's expression. He didn't address it directly. Instead, he said, Halverson's was a 71 shovelhead. Took me 8 months. He paused. Worth every one of them. I believe it, Dutch said. And they were talking. Not about the important things, not yet. About engines and parts and a particular oil seal problem that Torch had been having with his own bike for 6 months and couldn't solve. And Jack listened to the description and said, primary chain tensioner, without hesitation, and Torch looked at him the way a man looks when he's been walking on a rock in his shoe for 6 months and someone finally names it. You sure, Torch said. 90%. Pull the primary cover look at the tensioner shoe. I'd bet the shop on it. I've been to 3 mechanics. Did any of them ask you what the sound does when the engine's cold versus warm? Torch paused. No. Then they were guessing. Something loosened in the room. Not all the way, not completely, but enough that the air was different, less tightly wound, more like the air between men who have history and are beginning to figure out what to do with it rather than simply how to survive it. It was Dutch who looked at the corner first, at the canvas-covered shape. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then carefully he said, Emily said you don't ride anymore. Jack followed his gaze. His face went still again. She talks too much. She talks the right amount, Dutch said, for a young woman who's worried about her father. I'm not something to worry about. Jack, I'm fine. I'm out here. I work, I eat, I sleep. Emily comes on Sundays, I'm fine. You covered your bike. I covered it because I wasn't using it. You haven't used it in 11 years. That's right. Why? The question sat in the workshop air like something physical. Jack took a long drink of his coffee, set the cup down, looked at the covered motorcycle the way you look at something that holds too much memory, too much meaning, too much weight to approach directly. Because the last time I rode it, he said Sarah was on the back. He said it the way you say a thing you've been saying inside your own head for so long that saying it out loud sounds strange and familiar at the same time. We went up into the high country, the 2 of us, in September, 3 weeks before her diagnosis. We didn't know anything yet. It was just a September ride. He stopped. I haven't been able to get on it since. Nobody said anything. Rex set down his cup. He walked to the corner. He stood in front of the covered motorcycle and looked at it for a long moment. Then he reached out and put one trembling hand on the canvas very gently, the way you touch something that belongs to someone else's grief. You should ride it, Jack, Rex said. Not for us. Not for any reason except that it was yours before it was a memorial. And it's still yours. Rex. I know. Rex turned around. I know you don't want to hear it. I know it's not my place. I'm saying it anyway because I'm old and my hands shake and I've stopped waiting for the right time to say things. He looked directly at Jack. She'd be furious at you for that bike sitting there. You know she would. Jack looked like he'd been struck, just for a second. Then the look passed and something underneath it surfaced, something that was either the beginning of anger or the beginning of something else entirely. He walked to the corner. He stood next to Rex in front of the covered bike. His hand went out and touched the canvas, just the fingertips. He stood like that for a long moment. Then he said, "It needs work, hasn't run in 11 years. Probably needs everything carbs cleaned, brake lines, checked tires at minimum." Gravel looked at Dutch. Dutch looked at Torch. Torch looked at Rex. "We've got time," Gravel said carefully. Jack turned around. He looked at the four of them with an expression that was calculating something, measuring something, running some internal equation that took a few seconds to resolve. "You plan on staying," he said. It was not entirely a hostile question. "If you'll have us," Gravel said. "I've got one spare room. There's a motel in town, 12 miles. "The motel's fine," Dutch said immediately. "I've stayed in worse," Torch said. "We all have," Rex said. Jack looked at the bike one more time. Then he looked at his hands. Then he did something that none of them had seen. Yet he sat down on the stool that Torch had vacated heavily, like a man whose legs have finally registered a long journey. "She was going to ride it herself," he said. "Sarah. She'd been after me for 2 years to teach her properly, not just the back seat. She wanted her own license for one." His voice was even but barely. "I kept saying we had time. There was always going to be time." The workshop held that. "There wasn't," he said. "No," Gravel said. "There wasn't." Jack looked up at him. "Do you know what the worst part of that is? Not that she didn't get to ride. It's that I told myself we had time. Every day, I told myself that." He shook his head. "You think you learned something like that once. You think you learn it and it becomes part of you and you never make that mistake again. And then you spend 11 years alone on Mesquite Road and you realize you've done the exact same thing in a different direction." Nobody answered because there was no good answer. But Dutch slid his stool a little closer and Torch refilled his own coffee cup and then refilled Jack's without asking. And Rex stayed where he was, standing next to the covered motorcycle, like a man keeping watch over something that deserved it. And Gravel sat down on an overturned crate across from Jack and said, "Tell us about her." Jack looked at him. "What? Sarah, tell us about her. We met her, twice? She deserves better than twice." Jack looked like he was about to refuse. The refusal moved across his face clear as weather. Then it passed. "She hated mornings," Jack said slowly, like genuinely hated them. "Could not function before 8. Wouldn't even try. But if there was a sunrise worth seeing, she'd set an alarm for 5 and never complain about it once." He paused. "She kept a list, places she wanted to see a sunrise from. She got through most of them." "How many?" Dutch said. 31. Jack said it with a precision that told you exactly how many times he'd counted. "We had 6 left. The number sat in the workshop." "She sounds like she was something," Torch said. "She was the whole thing," Jack said simply. "That's all. She was the whole thing." And for the first time since 4 Harley engines had cut off in his driveway, Jack Carter's voice broke. Just once, just slightly, like a single stone giving way in a wall that had been holding for 11 years. It was enough. Nobody moved to fix it. That was the right call. When a man breaks even just slightly, even just for a second, the worst thing you can do is rush to patch it. You let it breathe. You let it be what it is. Jack Carter had been holding that particular stone in place for 11 years, and it had moved exactly 1 inch, and that was enough for one moment. Gravel looked at the floor. Dutch looked at his coffee cup. Torch was very still. Rex was the one who sat down right there on the workshop floor, back against the wall, like a man who has decided this is where he's staying for a while. He did it slowly on account of his knees, and there was something about the deliberateness of it that said more than any words could. He was not going anywhere. None of them were. Jack pulled himself back together the way he always did, quietly internally without drama. He cleared his throat once, took a drink of coffee, looked at the wall. 31 sunrises, Dutch said after a moment. Not to fill the silence, just because it deserved to be said again. Yellowstone was her favorite, Jack said. Said it looked like the world was learning the color orange for the first time. He shook his head, but there was something different in it now. Not just grief, but something warmer at the edges. I told her that was the most ridiculous thing I'd ever heard. She said that was because I had no poetry in my soul. Did you, Torch said. Jack looked at him. Did I what? Have poetry in your soul? A pause. She thought so. That was enough for me. The workshop held that for a moment, and the holding of it felt different than the silences, before less like absence, more like presence, like something had been let into the room. Then Jack straightened, set his cup down. And when he spoke again, his voice was back to its regular register, control, and direct, a man redirecting the conversation because he's given it what he can give it for now. The bike, he said. Everyone looked at him. If I'm going to do this, and I'm not saying I am, I need to know what you're actually offering. Because I don't need pity labor. I don't need 4 men standing around my garage feeling bad about the past and thinking a tune-up settles the account. Nobody thinks that, Gravel said. Good. Then tell me straight. What are you here to do? Gravel looked at him without blinking. Whatever you need done, for as long as it takes. And when the bike runs, we ride with you, wherever you want to go. Jack studied him. You don't have a destination in mind. No. No agenda. None. That's a long way to ride for nothing, Jack said. It's not nothing, Gravel said. You know it's not nothing. Another silence. Jack turned and looked at the covered Harley in the corner. Looked at it the way he hadn't let himself look at it in a long time, not as a memorial, but as a machine. Something with parts. Something that could be taken apart and understood and put back together differently than it was. He walked to it, gripped the canvas with both hands, and pulled it off in one motion. The motorcycle underneath was dusty but intact. The dark red paint had dulled but not flaked. Chrome needed work. The seat leather had cracked along one seam, but the bones of it were solid. You could see that immediately, the way you can see the structure of something that was built right at the first time. Dutch let out a breath. Still beautiful. She needs everything, Jack said. He was already moving around it, looking, assessing his hands, not touching yet, but close. Carbs are going to be a mess. Brake fluid's probably degraded. Tires are cracked. I can see it from here. Fork seals almost certainly. Battery's dead, obviously. Obviously, Torch said, and there was something in his voice, a warmth, a recognition. This was Jack Carter in his element. This was the man they remembered. Primary chain, Gravel said. Jack looked at him. Then, for the first time since they'd arrived, something crossed his face that was in the neighborhood of a smile. Yeah, probably that too. He crouched down beside the bike and put his hand on the frame. Just held it there, palm flat against the metal like he was taking a pulse. The other 4 watched and said nothing. After a moment, Jack stood back up. His jaw was set. His eyes were clear. All right, he said. We start tomorrow morning. Early. I don't work slow, and I don't work with people standing around watching. If you're in the shop, you're working. Understood, Gravel said. Rex. Jack looked directly at him. You're on parts research. Your hands won't let you do the mechanical work, so I need you on the phone tracking down what we can't source locally. Can you do that? Rex straightened slightly, like a man who has just been given something to carry that fits his arms exactly right. Yeah, I can do that. Good. Jack looked at Torch. You said 3 mechanics couldn't find your problem. You bring your bike around in the morning and we'll pull the primary cover before we start on mine. 40 minutes, maybe less. Torch stared at him. You don't have to do that. I know I don't have to. Jack picked up the canvas cover and folded it with the practiced precision of someone who has folded the same thing the same way for years. I want to. There's a difference. He set the folded canvas on the workbench. You got a problem with your bike, it bothers me. That's just how I'm built. Torch opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. Thank you, Jack. Don't thank me yet. I might be wrong. You're not wrong, Torch said. I might be. But he said it without conviction, and they all heard the without conviction. Jack looked at all 4 of them. Motels 12 miles back toward town. Route 86 left at the water tower. You can't miss it. We'll find it, Dutch said. 6 a.m. Don't be late. We won't, Gravel said. Jack nodded once. Then he turned back to the motorcycle. and stood looking at it in the way of a man who has just made a decision he's not entirely sure about, but has made it anyway and is done renegotiating with himself. He heard them leave boots on the workshop floor, the door the crunch of gravel under 4 sets of feet moving toward 4 motorcycles. He heard the bikes start one by one and roll back down the driveway. He stood in the silence after. His hand was on the Harley's tank. The metal was cool under his palm. He didn't move it. "All right, Sarah," he said quietly to no one. To her. "All right." He didn't say anything else. He didn't need to. He turned off the workshop light and went inside, and for the first time in 11 years, he set his alarm for 5:30. Morning came fast. Gravel was there at 5:55, which meant he'd been up since 4. Dutch arrived with him. Torch was 3 minutes behind, and his bike was making the sound, the particular uneven secondary knock that had cost him 6 months and 3 useless opinions. And Jack heard it from inside the house and had the primary cover tools laid out on the bench before Torch even shut the engine off. Rex arrived last at 6 on the dot with a legal pad and 3 pens and a list of phone numbers he'd spent the night compiling from memory and 2 internet searches on his phone. He put the legal pad on the corner of the workbench and uncapped a pen and was ready. Jack looked at all of them standing in his workshop in the early light and said nothing for a moment. Then Torch, bike inside, left side to the bench. "Let's settle this first." It took 22 minutes. Jack pulled the primary cover, looked at the tensioner shoe for approximately 4 seconds, said there, and showed Torch the worn edge that had been the source of 6 months of grief. The replacement part was something Jack had on his shelf, a common enough failure that he kept spares, and by 6:30, Torch's bike was back together and ticking cleanly, and Torch was standing next to it with an expression that was somewhere between relief and the particular mortification of someone who has suffered unnecessarily for longer than necessary. "3 mechanics," Torch said. "Bad luck," Jack said. "Or they were in a hurry, one of the two." He was already moving to the Harley. "Doesn't matter now." They started on the carburetor. Jack worked the way he always worked, methodically, without wasted motion, explaining what he was doing in the flat, precise language of someone who has done a thing so many times it has become as natural as breathing. Gravel handed tools without being asked, which meant he had been in enough shops to know the rhythm. Dutch watched and learned and didn't pretend to know things he didn't know, which Jack respected immediately without saying so. Rex was on the phone by 7. He'd tracked down the specific brake line kit for a 1988 Softail. By 7:40 found a supplier for the fork seals by 8:15 and was in a detailed conversation about tire sourcing by 8:30 that involved 3 different vendors and a surprisingly complex debate about period-correct rubber. He conducted all of it from the stool in the corner legal pad on his knee pen, moving steadily, despite the tremor in his hand, and Jack looked over at him twice during the morning, and both times said nothing, but his expression said something. The carburetor came out dirty and gummed with 11 years of dried fuel and neglect. Jack cleaned it with the focus of a surgeon, methodical, unhurried, not rushing past any step. The other men worked around him on smaller tasks, prep work, cleaning, chrome, addressing the seat leather. It was Gravel who said, around 10 in the morning, "Tell me about 98. Jack didn't stop working. "What about it?" "Your version. We've told ours to ourselves enough times. I want yours." Jack was quiet for a moment. The cleaning brush moved in steady circles. "You were in a bad spot," he said. "We were. You didn't make it for yourselves. You were set up. I knew that before I got involved." "How did you know?" "Because I knew the man who set it up." Jack set down the brush, picked up a different tool. "Billy Reese. He'd been running a grudge against the club for 2 years over something that happened in New Mexico that wasn't even the club's fault. He was going to use that night to make a point." He paused. "I knew Billy, not well, but well enough to know he wasn't going to stop at a warning." Gravel was very still. "You never told us you knew Reese." "Didn't seem relevant at the time." Jack looked up. "You needed the situation handled. The why of it was secondary." "It wasn't secondary," Dutch said. "If you knew Reese, you knew what getting involved would mean for you afterward." "Yeah," Jack said simply. "And you still?" "Yeah." The workshop absorbed that. Torch sat down heavily on his stool. "Jack, we didn't know that." "I know you didn't. If we'd known you had a prior connection to Reese, that you knew what you would have told me to stay out of it," Jack said. He said it without heat, "and I would have gotten involved anyway. So the order of information doesn't change the outcome." "It changes what we owe you," Gravel said. You don't owe me anything. Jack's voice was firm, but not unkind. I made a choice. I knew the math. That's the end of that part. That's not the end of it, Rex said from his corner. His pen had stopped moving. That is not the end of it, Jack, and you know it. Jack looked at him. You lost your position, Rex said. Your contracting license. You lost relationships you'd had for 15 years because Reese had reach and he used it, and we were long gone by the time the fallout hit. Rex's voice was steady but tight, the way a voice gets when it's walking the edge of something it's been holding back for a long time. We drove out and you caught the weather, and we knew it was happening. We heard about it 6 months later through the grapevine, and we sent money and called it square and kept riding. And that was, he stopped. That was a failure, on my part especially. I was the one who knew you best. I should have come back. Why didn't you? Jack said. Not accusatory, genuinely asking. Rex looked at his hands. Because I was ashamed. And shame is a coward's compass. It points you away from the thing you need to face. He looked up. I pointed it away from you for 26 years, and then your daughter looked at my Harley through a diner window, and I ran out of road. The carburetor sat half assembled on the workbench. Jack looked at it. He picked up the cleaning brush again, set it back down, made a decision. Reese died 4 years ago, he said. Heart attack somewhere in Nevada. I found out from a mutual acquaintance, he paused. I didn't feel what I thought I'd feel. What did you feel? Dutch said. Nothing mostly. And then I don't know, something like relief, not because he was gone, because I realized I hadn't been thinking about him in a long time. That chapter had ended somewhere along the way, and I'd missed the ending. He looked at the Harley. What I hadn't let end was this. Nobody spoke. I've been keeping a door open, Jack said. That's what the covered bike is. A door I wouldn't close and wouldn't walk through. I just stood in front of it. His voice was matter of fact, but what was underneath it was not. Sarah used to say I was the best at starting things and the worst at finishing them. Said I'd leave a book half-read for 6 months and then read the last 100 pages in one night at 2 a.m. A pause. She was right. I read the first half of 11 years. I'm still standing at the middle. Gravel said, then let us get to the last 100 pages. Jack looked at him for a long moment, something working in his face that was unfamiliar. The unfamiliarity of a man who has been alone so long that being seen by people who actually know him has become startling, like stepping into a light after a long time in a dim room. Brake lines came in fast, Rex said from his corner, and his timing was deliberate, giving Jack a way out of the moment that wasn't retreat, just redirection. Supplier in Phoenix has them in stock. They can have them here by tomorrow morning if we order in the next hour. Jack cleared his throat. Order them. Rex was already writing. Tires are going to be the long pole, Jack said back in his working voice, and the shift was understood and respected by everyone in the room. I want period-correct rubber if we can get it. It'll take longer, but it'll be right, Gravel said. It'll be right, Jack confirmed. They worked through the morning and into the afternoon. There was a rhythm that developed the way a rhythm always develops when people who are capable of something work together toward it, a kind of conversation that happens through action, through handing and receiving, and moving around each other in a shared space without collision. Around noon, Jack went inside and came back with a plate of sandwiches and put it on the corner of the workbench without announcement, and the 5 of them ate standing up the way men eat when they're in the middle of something, and stopping fully would break the momentum. It was while they were eating that Dutch said, Emily called me this morning. Jack stopped mid-bite. How did she get your number? I gave her mine before we left the diner. In case, Dutch paused, in case things went sideways and she needed to know. Jack looked at him for a moment. What did she say? She wanted to know if you'd let us in. And I told her yes. Dutch paused. She cried, not a lot, just a little, like something releasing. Jack put down his sandwich. He looked at the floor. His jaw was tight. She worries about me, he said. It wasn't quite a question. Of course she does, Dutch said. She's your daughter. She loves you. I don't want her to worry. Then stop giving her reasons to. Jack looked up sharply. Dutch met his gaze without backing down. That's direct, Jack said. I'm 63 years old. I don't have the patience for indirect anymore. Dutch kept his voice even. You are her only parent. You are alive and capable and sitting on Mesquite Road under a canvas cover, and she drives out here every Sunday and watches you disappear one day at a time, and she doesn't know how to reach you. She's 24. She shouldn't have to know how to reach her own father. The workshop was very quiet. Jack said nothing for a long moment. Then, she looks like her mother. Yeah, Dutch said gently. Same eyes, same of the way she tilts her head when she's thinking about something. Just like Sarah. Jack's voice was careful and quiet. Some days that's the best thing in the world. Some days it's the hardest. I know, Dutch said. You don't, Jack said, not unkindly. But that's okay. Fair enough, Dutch said. But she's here, and she came to work this morning and she served coffee to strangers, and she thought about you the whole time. That's what I know. Jack picked up his sandwich, looked at it, set it back down. He stood up, walked to the workshop door, stood in it for a moment looking out at the driveway at 4 motorcycles lined up in a row, and beyond them the long flat horizon of the Arizona afternoon. Then he came back in, picked up his coffee, and said, Fork seals. Let's get into the front end this afternoon. I want to know what we're dealing with before the parts arrive tomorrow. Rex uncapped his pen. Gravel picked up a wrench, and the rhythm resumed. But something had moved. Anyone paying attention could feel it, some internal tectonic shift, slow and enormous. The kind that doesn't make noise when it happens, but changes the entire landscape above it. Jack Carter was talking. Jack Carter was working. Jack Carter had ordered brake line parts and eaten a sandwich standing up with 4 men in his workshop. And when Dutch had called him out directly, he had not shut the door. These were small things. They were enormous things. It was Torch who first noticed the way Jack moved differently in the second half of the afternoon. Still controlled, still precise, but something lighter in it. Something that had been absent from his body for a long time was beginning very cautiously to consider returning. At 4 o'clock, Rex's phone rang. He looked at the screen and held it up for Jack to see. The name on it was Emily. Jack looked at the phone, looked at Rex, said, answer it. Tell her. He stopped. Tell her Sunday dinner. She doesn't have to wait till Sunday. She can come out for dinner. Rex answered the phone. He said, Emily, it's Rex. Your father wants you to come for dinner. A pause. He listened. And then slowly a smile moved across the old man's face, full and real and younger than anything else about him. Yeah, Rex said into the phone. Yeah, I think it's going to be okay. He hung up. Nobody made a thing of it, but Jack turned back to the Harley and his hand rested on the frame for just a moment before he reached for the next tool, and the touch was different than it had been that morning. Less like loss, more like hello. Emily arrived at 6:15 with 2 grocery bags in the particular energy of a person who has been holding their breath all day and is only now beginning to let it out. She stood in the driveway for a moment before coming in. 4 motorcycles. Same ones from the diner parking lot, now dusty from the road and lined up along the side of the house like they belonged there. She looked at them for a long moment, then picked up her bags and went around to the workshop. The door was open, light spilling out into the early evening. She stopped in the doorway. Her father was at the workbench, back to her reassembling something with both hands and the focused quiet she had known her whole life. Gravel was across from him, holding a component steady while Jack worked. Dutch was on his phone in the corner, talking low. Torch was cleaning chrome with a rag in what looked like genuine concentration. Rex was on his stool with his legal pad, and he saw her first. He raised a hand, just a small wave, but his face was warm. Jack turned around. He looked at her the way he sometimes looked at her when he didn't know she was watching, with a fullness that he usually kept dialed down when he knew eyes were on him. Like she was something that still surprised him, even after 24 years. Something he hadn't gotten used to. You brought food, he said. I brought food, Aisha. She held up the bags. Is that okay? It's your father's kitchen, Gravel said. Pretty sure it's okay. She looked at Gravel. He looked back at her, and in his expression, she saw something she hadn't seen at the diner. Something lighter, something that had been carrying weight all morning and had put some of it down. How'd it go? She asked, directing the question at the room. Carburetors clean, Jack said. He turned back to the workbench. Fork seals are ordered. Brake lines come tomorrow morning. We're getting somewhere. She heard what he did say them. She heard it in the we. Good, she said. That's good, Dad. He didn't respond, but his shoulders were different than they were on Sunday. That was all she needed to see. She went inside and started dinner, and she did it with the window above the sink cracked open so she could hear the workshop, the low conversation, the occasional instruction, the sound of tools and men working at something together. She stood at the stove and listened to it and felt something in her chest that she didn't have a word for and didn't try to name. Dinner was loud in a way the house hadn't been loud in a long time. Not loud like a party, loud like people, actual people, plural, with opinions and appetites in the habit of talking over each other just slightly when the conversation got going. Torch had strong feelings about chili that turned out to be surprisingly funny. Dutch ate 2 servings of everything and complimented the cornbread with a specificity that suggested he had thought seriously about cornbread at some point in his life. Rex ate slowly and carefully and participated in the conversation with his eyes more than his words, which was a kind of participation that Emily recognized immediately because her father did the same thing. Jack sat at the head of the table, his place always his place, and he didn't say a lot, but he listened, and the listening was active and real, and occasionally punctuated by a short, dry observation that landed like a flat stone skipping water and made everyone at the table laugh before they'd fully processed it. Emily watched him when he wasn't looking. This was her father, the one who was in there underneath the 11 years of quiet. She had known he was still there, had believed it on the long drives out on Sundays when the house felt like a held breath, but knowing it and seeing it were different countries. After dinner, Gravel stayed to help her clear the table while the others drifted back toward the workshop or the front porch. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for the map." "You already thanked me," she said. "I know, I'm saying it again." He picked up a stack of plates and followed her to the kitchen. "You took a chance, talking to 4 strangers about your father. That took something." "I recognized your bike," she said simply. After that, it wasn't really a choice. Most people would have made it a choice. She turned on the tap. "He needed something I couldn't give him. I'm 24. I don't know how to reach him the way." She stopped, chose her words. "I don't have the language, the right history, whatever it is you have with someone after 30 years. She looked out the window over the sink. "I just knew that whatever you had with him, he needed it more than he needed me to keep showing up on Sundays and pretending everything was fine." Gravel was quiet for a moment. "It wasn't fine. No, it wasn't." "Is he going to be angry with you for sending us out here?" Emily considered this honestly. "Maybe, for a minute." She turned off the tap and dried her hands. "He'll get over it. He always does." "You know him well." "He's my dad." She said it simply, the same way she'd said it at the diner. Like it was the whole answer because it was. Gravel nodded. He set the plates down on the counter and looked out the window toward the workshop where the light was still on, and Jack's silhouette was visible moving around the Harley with a flashlight checking something on the undercarriage. "He's going to fight us every step," Gravel said. "You know that. He's going to tell us we're moving too fast, or we're doing it wrong, or he doesn't need the help." "Yes," Emily said, "and we're going to stay anyway." "I know," she said. "That's why I drew the map." The next morning, the brake lines arrived before 7. Jack was already in the workshop when the delivery came, and he had the packaging open before the truck was back on the road. Rex arrived 10 minutes later with coffee from a drive-through, 4 cups in a cardboard carrier, in a fifth that he handed to Jack without comment, the right order black, the way he'd filed that detail away from the day before. Jack accepted the coffee, looked at the cup, said nothing. But the fact that he didn't say anything was itself a kind of acknowledgement. They got into the brake lines after breakfast. It was careful, precise work, the kind that required patience more than strength. And Jack walked Gravel through the bleeding process with the same flat precision he'd used the day before, not simplifying it, but not making it inaccessible either. The language of a man who knows something well enough to share it cleanly. It was while they were working the rear brake that Dodge, who had been quiet all morning, said, "Can I ask you something, Jack? You're going to whether I say yes or no." "Fair." Dutch set down his wrench. "The morning after the situation, the morning after what happened with Reese's people and what you did, we rode. We rode. We didn't come back to check on you. We didn't make sure you were square. We just went." He paused. "I've never stopped thinking about that morning, what you looked like when we left." Jack didn't stop working. "What did I look like? Like a man who had just figured out what he'd signed up for." Dutch's voice was quiet. and like a man who wasn't going to ask for anything. Not once. I wasn't, Jack said. I know. That's the part I couldn't get out of my head. Dutch picked up his wrench again, turned it over in his hands without using it. You just stood there in that parking lot and you watched us go and you didn't say a word and your face was completely settled. Like you'd made your peace with it before we even left. I had, Jack said. How? Jack stopped working. He looked at Dutch. Because I knew who you were. All of you. I'd known it long enough to know how it worked. You deal with the situation and you move. That's the code. I wasn't part of the club. I didn't have a claim on a different outcome. He paused. I was angry anyway, but I wasn't surprised. Angry for how long, Dutch said. A pause. About 3 years. And after 3 years, Sarah talked me out of it. Jack almost smiled. She had a gift for that. She'd let me stay angry exactly as long as she thought was reasonable, and then she'd start talking, and she wouldn't stop until I'd talk myself to the other side of it. He shook his head. She said Jack being angry at men for being who they are is like being angry at the weather. You can do it, but it doesn't change anything, and it wears you out. Dutch was silent for a moment, then smart woman. The smartest person I ever knew, Jack said. And he said it the way you say a truth that is so settled and so complete that it doesn't require any decoration. He went back to the brake line. The morning moved forward. Rex tracked down the period-correct tires through a supplier in Albuquerque, a conversation that required 3 calls, 2 holds, and a level of patience that only a man who has spent decades waiting for things to be exactly right could sustain. He made the order. He wrote the confirmation number on his legal pad. He circled it twice. 3 days, he told Jack. On the tires. 3 days, shipping from Albuquerque. Jack calculated something in his head. That puts us at Thursday for assembly, if everything else is done. Everything else will be done, Gravel said. Jack looked at him. You sound sure. We've got 4 days and 5 men and 1 bike. Yeah, I'm sure. Something moved through Jack's face. He turned back to his work. But Torch, watching from the side, saw it that same thing he'd been noticing since the afternoon before, that loosening, that gradual return of something to a man who had been running on empty for a long time without fully admitting it. They broke for lunch and came back and kept going, and by mid-afternoon the brake system was done and pressure tested and solid, and Jack said, "Good," in the tone of a man who means excellent but doesn't use that word, and Gravel and Dutch exchanged a look that required no translation. It was around 3 o'clock when Rex put down his legal pad. He'd been quiet for the last hour, quieter than usual, which was saying something. Jack noticed it. He finished what he was doing and walked over and pulled a stool close to Rex's and sat down. You need a break, Jack said. I'm fine. Rex. I said I'm fine, Jack. And I said Rex. Jack kept his voice level. You've been somewhere else for the last hour. What's going on? Rex looked at his hands for a moment. The tremor was more visible in the afternoon, less controlled. He pressed his palms together to steady them. Ran into something this morning, Rex said. While I was looking up suppliers. I wasn't looking for it. It just came up. He paused. Newspaper archive from 2001. Jack waited. There was an article, Rex said, about the investigation about Reese and what came out afterward, his operation, the extent of it, the people who went down. He looked at Jack. Your name was in it. Jack's expression didn't change. Not in a bad way, Rex said quickly. The opposite. There was a detective, a woman named Corinna Walsh. She gave a statement to the paper. Said that there was a civilian who'd provided critical information before the formal investigation opened. Said without that individual, Reese's network might have run another 2 years. Rex stopped. She was talking about you, Jack. The workshop was completely still. Gravel had stopped moving. Torch had set down his rag. Dutch was looking at Jack with an expression that was working through several things at once. Jack said nothing. You didn't just get involved to help us, Rex said. His voice was careful and quiet. You were already talking to someone. You already knew the scope of it. You'd been... He stopped. How long had you been talking to Walsh before that night? A long silence. 4 months, Jack said. The word landed like a stone in still water. 4 months, Rex repeated. Reese wasn't just running a grudge against the club, Jack said. He said it the way you say something you've decided to finally say flat and clear without preamble. He was running product through 3 counties, had law enforcement contacts who were looking the other way. Walsh had been building a case for over a year, and she needed something she couldn't manufacture a credible witness to a specific transaction that would put Reese in the room. He paused. I'd seen the transaction 6 months before. I didn't know what I was looking at until Walsh explained it to me. So when you got involved that night, Gravel started? It wasn't just about you, Jack said. I'm not going to sit here and tell you otherwise. You needed help, and I gave it. But I also gave Walsh what she needed to move the case forward. It was one situation that served 2 purposes. And you let us think it was just about us for 26 years, Dutch said. I let everyone think whatever they thought, Jack said. I didn't correct anybody. That's not the same as lying. Jack, it was my choice to make. His voice was firm. I made it. I knew the client and I paid it, and I don't have regrets about the amount. What I have regrets about is... He stopped, found the right words. I have regrets about letting the cost become a wall, letting what happened push everything else out. Sarah tried to tell me. She said, you're proud of what you did, Jack. You just won't admit it, and that pride has nowhere to go, so it turns into something else. I told her she was wrong. He looked at his hands. She wasn't wrong. The workshop held all of that. Rex reached out. His trembling hand found Jack's forearm and gripped it. The grip was stronger than you'd expect from a hand that shook. She was right about the pride too, Rex said. What you did took something. It took real something. And you never let anybody say that to you. I'm saying it now, Gravel said. He stepped forward. He stood in front of Jack, and he looked at him directly the way he had in the diner booth when he told Emily they were coming out here. What you did in '98 was the bravest thing I've ever seen a man do, and I've seen a lot. And I spent 26 years not saying it to your face, and that ends today. He held Jack's gaze. You were brave. What you did mattered. You saved Lafsaw. Multiple. Not just ours. His jaw tightened. And you deserve better than silence from us. You deserve to hear that, and we owe you that, and I'm saying it now. Jack looked at him for a long moment. Then he looked away, out through the workshop door at the afternoon. At nothing in particular, or at everything. Walsh sent a letter, Jack said, about 2 years after, official commendation. Said I could request formal recognition if I wanted, that there were provisions for civilian cooperators. He paused. I put the letter in a drawer. Why could Emily said. Everyone turned. She was standing in the doorway. She'd arrived without any of them hearing her. She'd gotten off work early and driven out and come around the side of the house and stopped in the doorway when she heard her father's voice saying something she'd never heard before. Her face was very still. Her eyes were moving. Why did you put the letter in a drawer? She asked again. Jack looked at his daughter, and for a moment the calculation moved across his face, the familiar one. The one Emily had watched her whole life, the one that measured how much to say and decided on less. But today it landed differently. Because your mother was sick by then, he said, and nothing else was the right size to matter. Emily crossed the workshop floor. She stopped in front of her father and she looked at him for a moment, and then she put her arms around him and held on. And Jack Carter, who did not cry, who had not cried in front of another person in 11 years, who had kept everything he'd needed to keep in exactly the place he'd needed to keep it, put his arms around his daughter and held on right back. Nobody spoke. Nobody looked away either, because some things you don't look away from. Gravel put his hand on Rex's shoulder. Rex covered it with his own trembling hand and left it there. After a moment, Emily pulled back. She wiped her face with the back of her hand and straightened. She looked at the Harley. Is it going to run by Thursday? She asked, her voice only slightly rough at the edges. If the tires come in on time, Jack said, and if they don't, then Friday. She nodded. She looked at all 5 of them, 4 old men and her father, in a workshop that smelled like motor oil and held 30 years of things unsaid, and just now finding their way out, and she said, I'm off Thursday and Friday. I want to be here when it runs. You'll be here, Jack said. Good. She looked at the bike again, then at her father. She'd want to see it run, Dad. Jack looked at the Harley. His jaw moved. Yeah, he said quietly. Yeah, she would. He stood up, picked up a wrench, and went back to work. The tires arrived Wednesday afternoon. Not Thursday, Not Friday. Wednesday, a full day early in a box that Rex signed for with his shaking hand and his straight spine, and an expression that said he would have driven to Albuquerque himself if it had come to that. Jack heard the delivery truck from inside the house. He came out still holding a coffee cup and looked at the box and looked at Rex and said, "Early." "Yes," Rex said. "That changes the timeline." "Yes," Rex said again. "It does." Jack looked at the box for another second. Then he said, "Get the others," and went back inside to put on his work boots. By 4 in the afternoon, all 5 of them were in the workshop, and the tires were on, and the Harley was sitting on its own wheels for the first time in 11 years. And the effect of that, of seeing it upright and whole and no longer a covered shape in a corner, was something that moved through the room without being announced. Jack stood back and looked at it. He didn't say anything for a long moment. "Battery," he said finally. "Charged and installed this morning," Gravel said, "while you were on the phone with the parts supplier." Jack looked at him. "You did that without asking me." "I did." "I told you. You told me not to work without you in the shop. You were 30 feet away on the porch. I made a judgment call." Gravel kept his voice even. "You want to be angry about it, that's your right." Jack looked at the battery, looked at how it was seated, checked the connections without a word, which was his version of inspection, which was his version of acknowledging that the work was done correctly. Ignition switch, and he said, "Torch." Torch stepped up. He'd been handling the electrical system for 2 days, and he knew it now, the way you know something you have put real time into. He went through the switch with Jack standing beside him, and the two of them talked through it in the shorthand of men working a problem together, and at the end of it, Jack said, "Good," in the tone that meant exactly what it said. "Fuel," Dutch said. He was already moving. Fresh fuel properly treated, he'd sourced it that morning, and it was sitting in 2 cans by the door. Rex watched from his stool with his legal pad on his knee and his pen uncapped but not moving. He wasn't writing anything. He was just watching. His eyes were doing something that his face was trying to stay neutral about and not quite managing. It took another 2 hours to finish everything. The final checks, the fluid levels, the chain tension that Jack measured twice before he was satisfied the throttle response, the choke setting. He went through it the way he went through everything, completely without shortcuts, without the impatience that came from wanting it to be done, as opposed to wanting it to be right. At 6:17, Jack Carter crouched beside the Harley and looked at it from the side, the way you look at a thing you are about to trust with something important. He looked at it for a long time. Nobody rushed him. Then he stood up. He put his right hand on the grip. He looked at the ignition. "Emily should be here," he said. "She's coming," Rex said. "I called her an hour ago." Jack looked at him. "You called her?" "Yes." "On your own?" "On my own," Rex said, not apologetically. Jack opened his mouth, closed it, looked at the ceiling. "You 4 are the most presumptuous men I have ever met in my life." "Yes," Dutch said pleasantly. "We know. I need to stop being surprised by it." "That would probably be easier," Torch agreed. From outside, they heard a car turn onto the driveway. Gravel went to the door and looked out and said, "She's here," over his shoulder, and 2 minutes later, Emily came through the workshop door with her jacket half zipped and her hair still down from work and the look on her face of someone who drove 40 miles faster than they should have. She stopped. She looked at the motorcycle, whole upright tires on chrome, clean dark red paint catching the workshop light, and her hand went to her mouth. "Oh," she said, "just that." "Wednesday," Jack said. "Came in early." She lowered her hand. Her eyes were bright. "Does it run?" "Haven't tried yet. Waiting for you." She looked at him. The two of them held that for a moment, and something passed between them that was private and complete and needed no translation from anyone else in the room. "Okay," she said. "I'm here." Jack turned to the motorcycle. He put his hand on the key. The workshop went completely quiet. He turned the key. The dash lights came on, small amber alive. He reached for the choke. Set it. His movements were deliberate and unhurried, the way they were when he was doing something that mattered, something where getting it wrong was not an acceptable outcome. He pressed the starter. The engine turned over. Once. Twice. A cough, a rough catch, the particular sound of something fighting against 11 years of stillness. Jack held the throttle steady. The engine caught. It was rough at first, uneven complaining working through the resistance of long disuse. But Jack knew the sound of an engine finding itself, and he held the throttle at the right place and waited. And slowly the way a voice clears. After a long silence, the Harley's engine smoothed. The idle settled. The vibration through the frame became regular and purposeful. The deep rolling heartbeat of a machine that was built right and had come back to what it was built for. Emily made a sound. It wasn't a word. It was the kind of sound that comes from somewhere below language, from the place where things are felt before they're understood. Rex had both hands pressed flat on his legal pad, pressed down hard, and his eyes were wet, and he wasn't doing anything about it. Dutch had turned away, facing the wall, one hand pressed against it. Torch was looking at the ceiling with his jaw tight. Gravel looked at Jack. Jack was looking at the engine. His hand was on the throttle. His face was doing things complicated, difficult things that he was letting it do. Not fighting it, not shutting it down, just letting it happen while he stood there and held the bike steady and listened to it run. He let it idle for a full 2 minutes. Then he reached down and switched it off, and the workshop went quiet. And in the quiet, everything that had just happened was still present, the way sound stays in a room after the source stops. She runs, Gravel said. She runs, Jackham confirmed. His voice was rough. He cleared it. Needs another hour of idle time before any real riding, and she'll want to be rechecked after the first run. Everything tightens under heat and load. Tomorrow, Dutch said. First ride tomorrow. Jack looked at him. Tomorrow. All 5 of us, Gravel said. You lead, we follow. Jack was quiet for a moment. His hand was still on the grip. There's a road, he said, about 12 miles east. Goes up into the high country. Good pavement, good grade. Sarah and I used to run it on Sunday mornings. He stopped. I haven't been on it since. Nobody said anything. That's where I want to go, he said. Then that's where we go, Gravel said. Emily stepped forward. She put her hand on the seat of the motorcycle on the leather that had been cracked and was now repaired carefully with the same material and the same stitching pattern as the original. She ran her fingers along it. She would have loved this, Emily said quietly. Yeah, Jack said. She would have complained about being on the back instead of riding her own. She would have filed for her license 3 days later out of spite. He paused, and something in the pause was lighter than anything that had come before it. And she would have been right to. Emily looked up at him, her father's face in the workshop light. The lines in it, the gray at his temples, the oil still on his knuckles from a full week of work that he had done with his whole self. She said, I want to learn. Jack looked at her. Learn what to ride. She held his gaze. Properly, not the back seat, my own bike, my own license. She kept her voice steady. I should have asked years ago. I don't know why I didn't. Jack looked at her for a long time. Then he said, because you were waiting for me to offer. It wasn't a question. And I didn't offer because I couldn't look at the bike. And I couldn't look at the bike because he stopped. Because of what it meant. And now he looked at the Harley, at the clean chrome and the repaired seat and the engine that had just run for the first time in 11 years. He looked at it the way you look at something that has given something back to you that you had stopped expecting to see again. Now, he said, we'll figure it out. Emily Carter, 24 years old, who had drawn a map on the back of a guest check, who had recognized a motorcycle through a diner window and said 5 words that changed everything, who had driven 40 miles too fast to be in this workshop at the exact right moment. Emily Carter smiled, and it was her mother's smile, wideful, not asking permission. Jack saw it. He looked away quickly, the way you look away from something too bright. Then he looked back. Get some rest, he told the room. 6 a.m., we're riding at 7. That night, Jack Carter sat in his workshop alone. The Harley was in the center of the floor. He'd rolled it out from the corner to where it could stand properly in the open, and he hadn't moved it back. He sat on his stool, and he looked at it, and he didn't cover it. He thought about Sarah in September, in the high country, with the sun on the back of her jacket and her arms around his waist, and the particular sound she made when they crested a rise. And the view opened up, a sound that was half surprise and half recognition, like she was meeting something she already knew. He thought about 31 sunrises and 6 they hadn't gotten to. He thought about 4 old men who had driven into his driveway and drunk his coffee and spent a week in his workshop and said the things that needed saying, and the fact that it had taken 26 years to get here, and the fact that it had gotten here anyway. He thought about Emily, about a smile that belonged to 2 women at once and made the world feel both smaller and larger simultaneously. He thought about Walsh's letter in the drawer. He got up, went inside and opened the drawer. The envelope was still there, creased and yellowed at the edges. He took it out and looked at it, and then he put it on the kitchen table where he could see it, and he went back to the workshop. He sat back down. He looked at the bike for a while longer. 31 sunrises, he said to the empty workshop. We had 6 left. He was quiet for a moment. I'm going to finish them, he said. Not today, but I'm going to finish them. He stood up. He turned off the light. And for the first time in 11 years, he did not lock the workshop door. Morning came in sharp and clear, the kind of Arizona morning that looked like it had been designed specifically to be ridden through. The air had that particular quality, cool at the edges, warm at the center, the sky the deep blue that only exists before the heat takes over. All 4 bikes were in the driveway before 6:30. Rex had brought coffee again, 5 cups this time, without being asked, and they stood in the driveway and drank it mostly in silence, watching the morning come up over the flat land to the east. Emily arrived at 6:50. She parked next to the motorcycles and climbed out and looked at the 5 of them and said, "You all look like you're about to do something important." "We are," Torch said. She looked at her father. He was already in his jacket, the old one black leather, worn in at the shoulders that had hung on the peg inside the workshop door for 11 years and still fit. He was holding his helmet, turning it over in his hands, the way you hold something you haven't held in a long time. "You okay?" she said. "I'm okay," he said. She studied him for a second. "You sure, Emily?" He looked at her. "I'm okay." She heard it. The difference, not fine was what he'd said every Sunday for years, automatic and closed. Okay was specific, okay was true. "Good," she said. At 7 o'clock, Jack rolled the Harley out of the workshop. He stood beside it in the driveway in his jacket, with his helmet under his arm, and he looked at the 4 other bikes lined up beside his, and he looked at the 4 men who had brought their machines to Mesquite Road, and stayed, and he looked at his daughter standing at the edge of the driveway with her arms crossed and her eyes bright. He put on his helmet. He swung his leg over the seat. The leather gave under him the way it was supposed to, the way it was built to shape to his weight by years of use before the 11 years of stillness. He settled into it. His hands found the grips. He sat there for a moment. Emily watched her father's back, his shoulders, the way he was sitting on that motorcycle, not stiffly, not carefully, but with the ease of a man reclaiming something that was always his, something that had been waiting for him the whole time. He started the engine. The Harley fired on the first press, clean, even, immediate, not the rough reluctance of the night before, but the full voice of a machine that was ready. The sound of it filled the driveway and rolled out across the flat land in every direction and said plainly, without ambiguity, that something was happening here. Something that had been stopped for a long time had started again. The other 4 started their bikes. 5 engines. The sound of them together was something you felt in your sternum before you heard it with your ears. Emily felt it. She pressed her hand flat against her chest without thinking about it. Jack looked back over his shoulder. He looked at Gravel. Gravel gave him a single nod, small, direct, the nod of a man who has been waiting for this for 26 years and is not going to make a production of it. Jack looked forward. He put the Harley in gear. He started moving. The others fell in behind him. Gravel, then Dutch, then Torch, then Rex, and the 5 of them rolled down the driveway and onto Mesquite Road and turned east toward the high country, toward the road that Jack Carter and Sarah Carter had ridden on Sunday mornings, when the world was a different shape, toward a road that had been waiting, the same as the bike had been waiting, the same as the men had been waiting, the same as Jack himself had been waiting, without knowing exactly what it was he was waiting for. Emily stood in the driveway and watched them go. She listened to the sound of 5 motorcycles on the open road, that rolling, layered sound that got into your chest and stayed there. And she listened until it was gone, until the last of it had faded into the distance, and there was just the Arizona morning and the empty driveway and the open workshop door behind her. She didn't move for a long moment. She was thinking about 5 words, about how 5 words spoken casually without plan or intention, without any understanding of what they were about to set in motion, had done this, had reached into 11 years of silence and pulled something living back out. She was thinking about her mother, who had a list of sunrises and got through 31 of them and left 6 on the page. She was thinking about her father on that road right now in his jacket on his motorcycle with 4 men behind him who owed him everything and had finally showed up to start paying it in the only currency that actually matters, presence time, the willingness to stay. She pulled out her phone. She looked at it for a moment. She thought about calling, and then she put the phone back in her pocket because some things don't need documentation and some moments are complete exactly as they are. She went into the workshop. She picked up Rex's legal pad from the stool where he'd left it, and she looked at the pages, the lists of parts, the confirmation numbers, the notes in his careful trembling handwriting, and she set it back down. She looked at the place in the corner where the canvas cover had been folded and put on the shelf, still there neatly stored, no longer needed. She looked at the center of the workshop floor where the Harley had stood the night before, and where there was now nothing but clean concrete, not empty, just open, ready for the next thing. She walked to the door. She stood in it the way her father had stood in his workshop door on the night they first arrived, looking out at the driveway at 4 motorcycles. She stood there, and she breathed the morning air, that cool-edged Arizona air, and she thought about Sundays, about how from now on Sundays would be different. She didn't know exactly how. She just knew. In the high country 12 miles east, Jack Carter crested a rise on a road he hadn't ridden in 11 years. The view opened up the way it always had, the same view, the same sweep of country below, the same sky above, too big for any frame you tried to put around it. The kind of view that made sure to make that sound half surprise and half recognition. Jack stopped the bike. He sat there on the shoulder of the road and looked out at it, at all of it, at everything the country held below, and the sky held above, and the road held ahead of him, miles of good pavement running into the distance. He heard the other 4 pull up behind him, heard their engines idle, heard them stop. Nobody said anything. They knew what this was. You don't speak in a moment like this. You let a man have what he's come to have. Jack sat on Sarah's motorcycle, his motorcycle, their motorcycle, the one that had been covered in a corner for 11 years and was now warm under him and running and exactly where it was supposed to be. And he looked out at 31 sunrises and 6 that were left and a future that had been waiting, patient and quiet for him to come back to it. He took a breath. He let it out. He reached back and put his hand briefly on the seat behind him, on the leather that had held her for 31 September mornings and more miles than he could count, and he held it there for just a moment. Then he put both hands on the grips. He looked at the road ahead, and Jack Carter rode. He rode not as a man running from something and not as a man trying to go back to something, but as a man moving forward into a life that still had road left in it because it did, because there was more road than he had let himself see, because a young woman with her mother's eyes had looked through a diner window on a Tuesday morning and said 5 words that rearranged everything. Some doors close and stay closed. That is true, and it is real, and it costs what it costs. But some doors, if the right people show up at the right time with the patience to wait and the honesty to speak and the willingness to stay, some doors open again. They open, and the light that comes through them is not the same light as before. It is different and harder won and worth more for everything it took to get there. Jack Carter rode east into the Arizona morning, 4 friends behind him, his daughter somewhere back on Mesquite Road, learning to stand in an open doorway, and in front of him a road that had no end he could see from here. That was enough. That was exactly enough. That was everything.